Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Voxology Podcast. Mike and Tim here. And we're recording, unusually, the introduction at night. We've got a great show for you. I hate calling it a show, but, I mean, I don't know what else it would be. But we have a guy that I have been trying to get on the podcast, Scott McKnight, one of my favorite theologians. He's written a couple of, and Scott's genius is in channeling really great scholarship into very accessible works. And he and his co-author Cody just wrote a book called Revelation for the Rest of Us. And as we are in the middle of a series of conversations about Revelation, it seemed like, hey, we had to talk to this guy. And then we found out the Holy Post interviewed him the week before we did, so we cooked up a bunch of different questions, and we're thrilled to have he and Cody on. So I highly encourage you not only to listen, but if you're interested in following along in the conversation. I mean, the book's amazing, and I didn't read it until it was released on the 28th of February, so I've not been using it at all in the Revelation stuff, but my goodness, I couldn't encourage it more as a great introduction. So that's what's coming. A really helpful intro that, just to hear it from another couple of voices about why it is that we've kind of understood Revelation wrong, and the possibility that you can actually understand it and make sense of the book. Not every detail, but like the grand narrative and how a lot of the things fit together. So super excited about that. I keep looking at my shoulder. I was thinking
about that. Why? What's over your shoulder?
Well, because I feel like there's a disturbance in the force.
Uh-oh.
And I hear, like, one or two steps at a time, a young man with a yearning for a theme song. That's what I'm picking up. The nice thing about recording this little intro at night is that Mr. Seth is in the house. Come on over, boy. Come on over. He was making, why are you walking down the stairs so slowly, my son? You know we love you. You know we want you on the show.
Hi, Stefan.
The fact that the Voxology podcast is on YouTube has made like a whole world of difference now to Mr. Seth. So We're very excited. And not excellent. We're making faces at each other. Perfect. Let the hearer understand. Seth,
did you hear my face?
Tell us a little bit about your weekend.
My weekend is good.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, absolutely.
Miss Tia got me.
Hold on, we can't. There you go.
Oh.
There you are. There, when we see your face, bro.
With the haircut.
We got haircut, man.
Chick-fil-A.
And Chick-fil-A. I thought you'd be a little more excited about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have church today.
We had church today.
We have today.
Yeah, we did the Shema today, didn't we? You and me.
Shema with Chase.
Yeah, we had Chase up. He did the Shema with us.
And I have gone to McDonald's with my dad.
Yeah, went to McDonald's because Chick-fil-A's closed.
Yes.
Yeah, so we get chicken nuggets.
That's right. It's a holy day.
Yeah, what's that?
Yep.
Sunday.
It is Sunday. That's right. Chick-fil-A isn't open on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had a great time, huh?
Yeah.
So Timothy, how was your week? Can you give us just very quickly a short review of the movie Cocaine Bear? I'd really appreciate, because on behalf of all of us who will never see that movie, first of all, is it a real movie? And secondly, were there any redeeming features to this?
First of all, it is a real movie. Second of all, no. It's exactly what you expect of it, but a little bit worse. Like, you go into a movie like that expecting it to be, a bear eating cocaine and attacking people, but that's as far as the narrative plot really goes.
Okay. All right.
That bear just continually finds another package of cocaine and eats it and then goes on another rampage. So
okay.
I'm sure there's some people that will love it.
Yeah.
I'm more intrigued by the fact that it was directed by Elizabeth Banks.
Right.
Which is crazy. But
yeah. Yeah, that is
She
crazy.
must have been pulled a lot of friends in because there's a lot of, you know all the actors that you see on the screen.
I love it, and they
So it's like, all
they
right.
all perish dramatically. That's so great. So yeah, why are you coughing, bro? What's going on?
It's just coughing like Nate.
You were coughing like Nate.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that explains.
Tis the
it.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally, dude.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Now, one other thing we need to get to before we dive into Revelation, there was an article published earlier this week by Joshua Ryan Butler, and it was on the Gospel Coalition website. And it was an excerpt from his forthcoming book called Beautiful Union. And if you are not on the Twitter sphere, the excerpt was...
First of all, congratulations.
Yeah, you're not missing much. The excerpt was troubling, to say the least. And I will spare you the very detailed language, but the idea was that the sexual act, of course, is a representation of the gospel. And it was a very sort of complementarian understanding of the woman's role as hospitality, and the man as generosity. And quite rightly, there were people even within the Keller Center, which is an expression of the Gospel Coalition now, who were, rightly calling all sorts of things into question. And we had actually booked Josh. He'd emailed us. He's been on our show, and he emailed us several weeks ago and was like, "Hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you guys about this." We said, "Absolutely. We think it fascinating to try to articulate a compelling sexual ethic in today's world." And we were going to use that to sort of jump into, Seth, I like the noises you're making.
Thanks.
We were going to jump into just a whole series of conversations about it, but we're not sure that's wise. I haven't even gotten to the book yet, but Gospel Coalition has pulled it down, the first chapter and the excerpt down, and he is no longer part of this Keller thing. And I personally think, and have had great experiences with him as a very generous thinker. And Lord knows I get a lot wrong myself. And so there's a piece of me that is sad because of how all of this has conspired, and the consequences that will weigh on him. But I'm more sad that this kind of theology still exists and is platformed and was deemed by many of the big influencers at the Gospel Coalition as a magnum opus and literally the most compelling book on sexual ethics that they've read. And so there is a great disconnect. That was Seth chewing on my ear. There was a great disconnect between the intention of the book and the heart I think Josh probably had behind the book, and how it comes across and the way particularly sexual abuse survivors have heard it. And interestingly enough, Tim, you texted me something Rachel Held Evans had written in 2012 that addressed this. What was the quote that you found really compelling?
Well, she wrote a whole blog post to the Gospel Coalition on this topic, on something else that they had put out in 2012. But it rings very relevant. So this is just one little line out of it. She says, "For all of our debating about gender roles and church leadership, motherhood and singleness, sex and housework, women working in the home, and women working outside of the home, this conversation isn't actually about any of those things. It's not about sex. It's not about church leadership. It's not about roles. It's not about the Bible. It's about power. It's about whether or not patriarchy, man's rule over woman, really represents God's ideal for the world."
Yeah.
And a lot of sisters rightfully upset by what they read. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And for Tim and I, or at least I'll just speak for me. I mean, it represents some, I think, I really find the exegesis disagreeable. And I think the points and the metaphor that's developed in the article are not accurate. But there is this whole host of trusted sisterhood that is not only speaking to that, but also the way in which language and the idea, the images that have been that are presented have been used to actually justify sexual assault and worse in religious terms. And I was talking to our friend Susie, and she literally had, I mean, I want to bring her on maybe next episode. She literally had 2 conversations with women who were having a great deal of marital difficulty because of teaching like this.
Totally.
And in one case, it was very much about power and, that she owed him whatever. And so we just have to do better. I think the Bible has a sexual ethic. I think that, however, to be articulated that way in today's world is just, I feel bad for all of the people who let that slide without raising any red flags. And then you have some, I don't know about everybody, but you have some people who endorse the book and have come out and said, well, they didn't really read it. And
Right.
I have to tell you, that's so just crappy. It's just, I get it, because you want to do favors for people and you don't have time to read 87 books when a friend of yours is asking for a recommendation. And so you skim through and grab the highlights. But my goodness, to come up and say, yep, sorry, I didn't read it. I'm retracting my endorsement now that there's blowback. I mean, that just seems
which was more than one. There was a few people that.
Yeah. That just seems endemic of the hollowness of the whole enterprise. Yeah. Right? Oh.
Yes.
And so there's
it's a bummer. It's a messy situation that Josh seems to be taking most of the brunt of the repercussions, and it is his writing, but the Gospel Coalition, you'd hope that this would be, every time something like this happens, you always hope that people are going to take a second, take a breath, and reassess. Hey, a lot of people, there's a lot of pushback on this. Is it warranted? Is it not? Like, to really think about things. But the fact that, the Rachel Held Evans article was from 11 years ago doesn't seem like relevant. They've learned a ton. Yeah.
Yeah. And even the apology, it's like they posted an apology that was, great. And again, I'm not in the business of trying to judge everyone's apologies, and I'm not judge or jury over anybody. But there didn't seem to be acknowledgement of the specific harm that people were pointing out. There was just an acknowledgement that, thank you for the feedback. We're sorry this got through. We'll do better with our editorial processes. And it's like,
is that their way of saying they didn't read it either?
That's a great point. The problem is that it's not just the editorial issues that are the issue. It's the framing of complementarian theology in this way that's the issue. And and Seth, if you could see his face right now, is absolutely horrified that such things were released unread into the wild, if that was indeed the case. So anyway,
I've joked to you that during the Revelation podcast, I've had that Hamilton line stuck in my head, like
it's not a revelation.
You want a revolution? I want to. Well, she says it the other way. Want a revolution? I want a revelation. But then there's another part of that lyric right before that where she's advocating to put women in the sequel, like when they write the Declaration of Independence, to include women in the conversation. And that also is something I thought about during this whole thing, was like, maybe you guys need to have a few more women in the room when you're making these decisions or writing these articles or these books.
Well, there's a bunch on the Keller, the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics or whatever it's called.
I wonder how male-oriented that is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Within those walls. Yeah, I have no idea.
But anyway, we're not. Yeah. I think we're gonna spend some more time in this subject. I reached out to Josh personally and just said, hey, appreciate you and here to talk if you'd want, and not that he has any reason to do that. And I don't think it best we have him on at this juncture. I think there are a whole bunch of things that need to get sorted out. But all that is to say, friends, we are all trying to figure out a way to present fidelity to Jesus and to articulate it, making room for all of the ways that almost all the words have been abused. And And that's, that's a really hard thing. I think that this is a case where, Seth, you're making very loud. I don't know what that noise is. Do it again. What is that? Are you like? Do that again. Do the.
Hello, my name is Sophie. Welcome to Voxology YouTube.
Yeah, that's definitely not the noise that you were making, for sure. So all that is to say, we wanted to kind of reflect on that a little bit, and particularly because I have a copy of the book I've not read yet. Both Tim and I do, and we were going to interview him at the end of the month. And but as part of that, promoting the book, because we thought, okay, these are conversations worth having, but I'm not sure that's a wise thing. So we still intend to have conversations about this. We intend to hear a lot from our sisters about how this was feeling and coming across. But as for me and my house, and Tim and his house, and Seth and his house, yeah, we're not going to talk about it that way.
What?
So, yeah, that's right. So, Seth, here's what I want you to say.
Let's do pick the side first.
You want to do a shout out first?
Mr. Seth, Mr. Monk, Mr. Stafford.
Yep. I think people know that you and me and Tim Stafford are on it right now. I think that's great.
Nice for you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Right? Yes.
Okay, well, we're doing a shout out. Okay, here we go.
A big shout to by Garbus.
To Tim Gombis, yeah. Big shout out to Tim Gombis.
And Mike.
And
That's
Mike,
right.
You bet. Huge shout out to that guy. Anybody else?
And to Mike.
And
Yes,
Daddy
sir.
Mike, yeah. And Tim, totally. Massive shout outs to those guys. And to Seth Erie, who makes everything better.
That's
Right?
Yeah.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the good Reverend Scott McKnight.
Voxology YouTube.
And yep, check us out on Voxology YouTube. And
Faces.
to say, pound that subscribe button.
Hey, hit the subscribe button.
Yeah. Say, hey guys.
Hey guys.
That's what they all say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up? It's a plug up to it. Hey, subscribe button.
Hit the subscribe button. What's up, YouTube? So anyway, Tim, you got anything you want to close with, buddy?
Nope.
All right.
All right.
We've got a lot of chaotic neutral energy over here.
That's
right.
Next time, fans.
Yep. See you next time, friends. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Everybody, we are so delighted to have a couple of guests via the studio. Cody, and how do I say your last name? Matchett?
Matchett, yeah, that's right.
Yes, perfect. And Scott McKnight, Dr. Scott McKnight, have co-written a book called Revelation for the Rest of Us. And it is a fantastic read, and we are delighted to be joined by you both. Cody is in Calgary, Canada, and Scott, you are in Chicagoland, correct?
Yeah, northern suburbs of Chicago. Yes.
Nice. Well, we're delighted to have you guys. Tell us a little bit, if you would. Cody, let's start with you. Just give us a little bit of your background growing up, what the book of Revelation was to you, how it was presented, how you understood it, and then how that began to change.
Yeah, I would say the short version of that story is I became a follower of Jesus in my early 20s.
Nice.
And that has sort of uniquely positioned me in reference to this particular last book of the Bible, in that I don't come with some of the sort of same subcultural baggage as other people do. I didn't grow up on Left Behind. My wife did. My wife, is a cradle Christian. She grew up reading those books and, all of the nightmares that come with them. But I didn't grow up with any of that. Early on in my apprenticeship to Jesus, I ended up going to Bible college and did a biblical studies degree. And so I was equipped fairly early to think about how to read some of these texts, although I will say, honestly, there are pieces of Revelation that remained a mystery to me for many years in terms of locusts and scorpions stabbing people and all the great things that we find
Cody,
in there.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Those are Apache helicopters. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, B-52 bombers.
Yeah.
The B-52 bombers
that was awesome.
in the text, which, as we mentioned in our book, are now ancient history.
Right.
But yeah, my experience with the book was somewhat limited, and I think, let me speak from, because Scott can speak to the other end of the spectrum. I pastor in a church here in Calgary, and I work with a lot of young adults, and I also have the opportunity to teach classes to a lot of young adults. And I think their approach to the book of Revelation is a lot like mine. They mostly want silence. Like, they know that the way that people have come to read it is not right, but they don't know what is right. And so instead of trying to sort it out, they would rather almost axe it from the end of the New Testament writings rather than try to figure out.
Right.
So they want silence. They know it's bizarre. And I probably had that experience for many years. And the more I got, into gospel studies, and then the more I got into the rest of the New Testament, I had a hunch that, since the New Testament revolves around the person of Jesus, that Revelation must also revolve around Jesus.
Shocker.
And that sent me down the old rabbit hole of Revelation. But that's sort of my sort of take and perspective.
And Scott, you came from a more speculative kind of background, which was my kind of upbringing too. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how it was that you encountered the book of Revelation, and then when did you initially begin to suspect that traditional way wasn't the correct way?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having us on. And I want you to know, Cody came to us from a good Christian college in Canada, and immediately I recognized his giftedness in New Testament studies. So we began to work together, and then the next thing I thought, he could help us with this book.
I love it.
And it helped me get through it, because it's a lot of work to put it all together.
Yeah.
So, but I grew up in dispensationalism. When I was about 12, I was a paper boy, and my father, he helped me, and I started making money. And I can remember wanting to buy something with the money I made, and I bought a Schofield Reference Bible.
There it is.
Yes.
Morocco leather.
Oh,
And I still have it. I don't have it in here, but every now and then I pull it off the shelf just to look at it, and it's full of dumb notes that I wrote when I was in high school. But I grew up in that.
Yeah.
And my father taught some of this stuff, and our pastor was basically a dispensationalist. But then my youth pastor was really into it. But it was when I was in high school, I was a senior in high school. Someone told me about a new book at the bookstore, at the Christian bookstore in our town, by Salem Kurban, called Guide to Survival. All right, this is a book. I would say Hal Lindsey cribbed all his ideas from Salem Kurban.
Yeah,
he had a book before that called 666.
well,
So
there,
if you know Salem Kurban, Mike, then you are in a very elect company.
I like to think I am an elect company, but yeah, for sure. No.
Let's not go there. All right. So I read this book, Guide to Survival, and the basic book idea is it is written for people who survive the rapture, in that sense, that are in the tribulation, and they need a manual to understand what's going on. So it's very clever, and it was basically a radical, dispensational, speculative, who's doing what in the book of Revelation. And by who's doing what, I mean who in the modern world corresponds to what is said in the book of Revelation. So at that time, when I got to college a couple of years later, it was Gorbachev with his birthmark, Henry Kissinger, and I remember one time I was just kind of sleepily looking at TV, and they were identifying it with Salem Kurban. I mean Saddam Hussein, and I'm
that's
sitting
what I
there
remember.
Oh, they just keep changing names. It's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So I grew up in that, and in college I moved toward a post-trib rapture. But it was when I was in seminary and then doing my PhD that I read all the major apocalyptic literature, and I just thought this dispensational stuff is completely wacky. And I really think it's wacky in many ways. And it's not disrespect to people who are dispensationalists. It's just that when they start doing this, I think they just simply do not understand how to read apocalyptic literature.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one of the things that so we're having a series of conversations around Revelation. We're in the topic of genre. And so one of the things that you guys suggest, which I'd never considered, is apocalyptic literature as an art form. And I'd love to have you guys expound on that a little bit, because we've talked about it, but that captured a nuance that I'd not heard before.
Well, I'm going to ask Cody a question, because I think he's probably going to answer this. I don't. How many potential echoes of the Old Testament are in the book of Revelation?
It depends on who you ask. I think the most moderate estimation would be somewhere between 300 and 600.
Yeah.
300 and 600.
I think
and
300 would be very moderate. Some people go much higher than that.
And how many actual quotations from the Old Testament?
Oh, very few.
Yeah.
The number I'd read was 400 verses and 404 allusions.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, Greg Beale is the master of this.
Totally.
I mean, he's spent his whole life doing this.
Yeah.
But the art form, I think, starts right there.
Mm.
And
That's
I
good.
think it's a failure to the book to think that John is quoting these texts. He's so absorbed with these texts, and he's thought about them so much that the visions that he sees turn into language that sounds like Ezekiel here and Zechariah there and Isaiah there and Daniel here. It's just back and forth so much that he can't write down his visions without it sounding like Old Testament. And yet it is so peculiar that he doesn't quote the text. It's not like he's reading Daniel and interpreting it, like writing a midrash or a commentary on it. He can't see things without those texts shaping what he sees.
Do you see an anti-imperial thread also at play in some of the visions?
Yeah, every one.
Yeah. So yes. If you're going to ask a yes or no question, then you're going to get a yes or no answer.
When I first started doing radio interviews, my publicist said to me, "Scott, when they ask you a question, answer it."
Yeah.
And she said, "Don't be a professor." So,
well, we're signing up for the professor part. So this is all intended for you guys to riff on.
okay.
Because the way I've come to understand the book is it's in dialogue with the Old Testament, but in a very sort of anti-imperial sort of way. And I wanted to see what you guys were thinking about that.
Yeah. It seems to me, part of what Scott's articulating here too, John clearly had these visions. The way in which he had these visions is, up for contest and debate, but he clearly had time to meditate upon these and then filter whatever he saw. As Scott's saying here, we would use modern psychological language, filter them through his maps of meaning, his conceptual frameworks. Yeah. But his conceptual framework is the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
And so the only way he can make sense of what he's seeing is by using the story that he's so saturated in. But then as he's penning it, as you're articulating here, you see that it's not just Hebrew Bible. He's also engaging with the Greco-Roman world, the Roman imperial world that he is living in. And so some of the images have these, interesting forms of convergence, right? By the time we get to Babylon in Revelation 17 and 18, and David De Silva, I think, has demonstrated this in his most recent book, but this is Roma. She's ghastly, and John he's presenting an image that they would have been familiar with, but he is turning it on its head. And he's apocalypsing it, right? He's showing us behind the curtain what this really looks like. And it's not nearly as beautiful as one might think on the surface.
Yeah.
And one of the themes that Cody and I developed is you can't read Revelation well until you read Revelation 17 and 18 on Babylon carefully to understand the context of what this book is actually about. This is not a book predicting the rapture and the rebirth of the state of Israel and whether Vladimir Putin is the Antichrist or not.
Right.
This is not what it's doing. It is describing, I mean, it waits a while but this is the haunting, looming reality that the churches of chapters 2 and 3 are living in. Is Rome's imperial order that imposes itself on them and is shaping them in new ways.
Yeah.
And so by reading Revelation 17 and 18 carefully, and this is one of the things that Cody can tell you, he's taught this to some people as well. If you just read it and pay attention to the major themes, you see what's going on at the level of, let's say, socio-political critique. This is what it's like. And that becomes the empire, the imperial order of Rome that John is most worried about in trying to get people to follow Jesus in Western Asia Minor in a way that is consistent with what Jesus is like, the Lamb. So I think I wouldn't say that John is some kind of warrior that he's going to go try to take over Rome. He doesn't think like that.
Right.
But this small group of people can sing songs and they can live in such a way that they think they're sort of foot draggers. They can subvert the order of Rome where they live because they're following Jesus.
Yeah. Do you think that Revelation tells us how it should be read? Are there clues in the text? Because I was taught to read it literally, chronologically, and predictively. Those were the three pieces to unlock.
I got to write that down. That's literally. Yeah, that's right. Literally.
Yep. Chronologically. And predictively. Predictively. Yeah. It's about time you write something of mine down, because I've written so much of your stuff down that it's only fair. No, but you guys spent...
But I won't quote you.
I don't know that I always quote you either, but one of the things that was eye-opening to me was the idea that Revelation itself tells us how we should read it. So, Cody, like you were saying, for those in the silence camp who are bewildered, how would I ever know what interpretation is right? There's so many. Yeah. How could I trust your guys' interpretation over all of the rest of them? So that's the first question. Does Revelation tell us how it's to be interpreted? And then secondly, who are you guys? I've actually heard this. Who are we to think that previous commentators have gotten it wrong? What makes us so aware, now, so as to kind of add a corrective to some of the strains of church history? So, number one is, what does the text itself say about reading it literally, chronologically, and predictively?
Yeah, I can begin. Sorry.
Let me start. I'll answer number two, then Cody can answer number one, because he'll be good on this. Okay, who are we? Well, here's why we need a new reading. And I say this quite often. Everybody's been wrong all along.
Whoa.
And that ought to be enough for us to think about what we're doing.
Yeah.
When people read the book of Revelation predictively, I call it, they become speculators. It's about speculation. The question they're asking is, who in the modern world fits, let's say, the beast from the sea or the beast from the land? And who are the Nicolaitans? They might even have some of these things, because in the history of the church.
Yep.
And they haven't, I often say it this way, they've almost gotten it right. By, instead of doing it predictively, they should be seeing themselves as discerning in the modern world signs of empire that block the lordship of Jesus in the world. So something like that. So yeah. I think it's not that everybody's been wrong about everything. It's the speculative approach has been proven wrong every time.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's good.
Now, I'll tell you one story, and then Cody. All right. When I was in college, I came home in my freshman year, and I believe it was spring break, and my church had some guy from Lynchburg Liberty.
Yeah.
I don't think it was even called Liberty at the time yet. Thomas Road.
Yeah, there it is.
Baptist, something like that.
Yeah.
So, and he was preaching, and he was doing rapture stuff and eschatology. And I mean, I really got worked up on this. And I thought, wow, this is serious stuff.
Yeah.
And so I say to my youth pastor, I said, do you think I should go back to college? I mean, Jesus is coming back. He thought by 1978,
Yeah.
I should spend the rest of my time evangelizing my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, just in case he's wrong, you should go back to college, because then you'll be prepared if he's wrong.
Mm.
That he was wrong.
Yeah.
That guy was wrong.
Yeah.
So-
Or maybe the rapture did happen and it was all the hippies and it's just us here left. And I don't know who wrote 88 Reasons for Jesus Coming Back in 1988. So they sort of keep churning these out every 10 years.
Yeah.
So
John Walver, wasn't it?
was it?
I think that may have been Walver.
All right.
So, Cody has a great answer to that first question.
All right, Cody. Let's
Does it
Cody,
tell us how to read?
Hey, Cody.
I mean,
this,
I wrote
this should be good.
I don't know if it will be, but I wrote a piece on this for Scott Substack in promotion of the book. I mean, I think the first thing that I'd say in response that, reading might actually be the wrong way to talk about this. Listening might actually be a better way to talk about this.
That was the question coming. You say Revelation's meant to be performed.
That's right, performed.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I
Leave
use
that
this
in.
phrase.
Good.
I've been using it with my students for years, called the hospitality of hearing. And I don't think we think about hearing in relation to hospitality, but I think we've been quite inhospitable in the way that we've listened to the text of Revelation.
Yeah.
And so part of what I've done, I just finished teaching Revelation this last winter to 35 students, all young adults, and all of the assignments related to kind of, listening, the performance-oriented aspects of the text, with these characters, what are they doing? How are they performing? What are their actions and behaviors?
So good.
So yeah, Revelation opens, telling us it's an apocalypse. You've already mentioned, Mike, that this is a technical form of literature. And we actually have an appendix in the book that sort of highlights a little bit of what you might see in this conventional genre of literature. But then John goes on to call it a prophecy and a letter.
Yeah.
And he says flourishing, or Makarios, blessed is the one reading, those hearing in the plural. And then this is the real kicker, those observing the words that are written in it.
Oh, that's
and by
good.
Observing, John doesn't mean those who are trying to predict the signs of the times as speculators. He means those observing the commands to follow the way of the Lamb, as Michael Gorman would say, in uncivil worship and witness in the midst of Babylon.
Yeah.
And so a faithful reading is what I say to my students. You faithfully read Revelation or heard Revelation if you are observing the words that have been written in it. And if you're not observing, then it's probably not a faithful reading of the book.
Got it. That's good. Scott, you were right. I don't even want you to add anything. That was.
I don't know even why you asked me any questions.
I know. I have respect for gentlemen with really great looking heads, and I lose respect for people that feel the need to cover theirs with head coverings. But that's a different conversation altogether. One of the interesting things that is very appealing to me that you guys do is you see it very much rooted in the first century, and yet still relevant. Cody, you were hinting at this just now, relevant to further iterations of culture and empire. Can you guys talk a little bit about how Revelation pulls both of those off?
Well, let me just say a couple points, and Cody can add to it. Babylon. Here's a statement that we make. In fact, it's so cool. It's such an important line that Zondervan turned it into a saying on a keychain.
Whoa! All right, hold on.
on a leather strap on a keychain.
Was it
says
Moroccan leather?
Not as nice as that Bible I bought in high school when I was 12. It says Babylon is timeless.
That's good.
And here's the point: Babylon is an image in Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Babylon in apocalyptic literature is sort of a trope for the evil empires of this world that Jews experience in oppressive ways, in ways that come in and sack their city, destroy their city, etc. So when John picks up and decides to describe Roma as Babylon, he is saying this is another instance of the original Babylon, in a sense. This Babylon is timeless. And I began to think about this, and I think Cody had some really cool charts about this. And that is, if you just think of history as a timeline, and you keep moving Babylon along, and then stop, and then all of the tyrants of that age begin to show up, and then you move it a little bit further along, and then you see tyrants here, then you move it a little. You get into the 20th century, and you see, let's say, Tsarist Russia, or you begin to see Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin, and you move it a little bit further, and you see, if you're Tom Wright, American militarism, and you begin to recognize that this trope of Babylon is a way of sabotaging imperial designs in the world in a way that we've had a rapture. We lost Mike.
Yeah, his power apparently just went out. So
okay, so I think it's important to see Babylon as timeless in that way, so that we become people who discern indications of Babylonian power, Babylon, in our world, wherever it may be found, whether it's your own country or some other country. And it has been a tendency of American Christians, evangelicals, who are dispensationalists, to see it in Russia, to see it perhaps in Europe, to see it in Italy, because of the Vatican and because of the Catholic Church. But the truth of it would be, if you study Revelation 17 and 18, you see the themes, and good old America shows up as a pretty good indication. And Cody, as a Canadian, is not afraid to say that.
Yeah, one of the things I'd add to that, Scott, and then maybe you want to hop in on some of the 7 markers of Babylon, but I would say, it's interesting for me, even as a pastor. So, I get to be in both of these worlds, pastoral ministry, and then getting to do some work in the academy and now PhD studies. The fascinating part about being a pastor is when we preach, we're often doing this work of saying, this is what the text means, and here's how it can be utilized or understood, in our own context. And it seems that with Revelation, we've just lost that impulse for some reason. It's the only book of the Bible that we think we don't do that with Revelation.
Totally.
As though God, in his wisdom, wanted to give these first century churches in Western Asia Minor a document that they could never possibly understand. I mean,
this isn't for you guys. This is for these guys down the road.
It just smacks of Western arrogance to think that we're the ones that in 2023 can sort out what this means, but in the first century they never would have understood, because they don't know what B-52 bombers are yet, or Hibachi helicopters. And so it's interesting to me, because I just try to push people against that impulse. If we can think that reading the book of Exodus has a merit for us in a kind of timeless sense, the way that it might speak to us, then Revelation is certainly the same, and this image of Babylon is certainly the same. And ancients would have thought of Babylon the way Scott exactly described it. And we go through a few examples in the book. But there are many more. But we highlight 7 sort of markers or indicators. They're not the only indicators of Babylon, but Scott, I don't know if you want to speak to those markers or indicators for a minute.
Yeah, when I began my PhD at the University of Nottingham in England, it was in the first month or two that we were there that I was with some young adults, sixth form type people. They weren't in college yet, but they were smart and they were snarky, and they had opinions. And Reagan was on the throne in the United States, and they thought he was the most evil empire leader in the world. And I remember thinking, wow, this is how Europeans perceive the United States. And it made me more sensitive. I mean, you've probably read enough of Tom Wright to know that he can be pretty critical of American militarism and politics, capitalism, etc. And these are the themes of empire in the book of Revelation. We isolate these major themes as indicators of Babylon, of empire that needs to be recognized and then resisted as dissident disciples. That there is an anti-God. Jews and Christians believed there was one true God, and the gods of Rome, the gods of Asia Minor, are not the true gods. They are idols. There is amazing descriptions of opulence in Revelation 17. And, I've seen some pretty big places in the world, and there's a lot of opulence in the United States. They're murderous, and that is they put to death believers, and in ways that are almost clinical, and they lack humanity about it. There was a consciousness of image in the Roman Empire that dominated every one of the cities. I've walked through Pompeii 3 different times. I love to go to Pompeii. Pompeii is almost like the reconstruction of an entire city. Of course, a lot of the really cool things are in museums, but images were everywhere that reminded you of Rome and reminded you of the gods of Rome, and Rome's politics, Rome's culture, Rome's way of life was indistinguishable from the religious practices.
That's right.
They didn't have private religion that way. Yeah. It was militaristic. The Roman Empire was brutal. I'm reading right now Suetonius's book on the 12 Caesars, and I'm reading the deified Julius Caesar now. I've read a few of the others, and I wanted to go back to read him. And he all these emperors basically make it as military murderers. They are vicious. Well, Constantine, when the church combines with the state, Constantine was a brutal military commander who, just like David in the spring, went to war to try to capture some more property and money. It was a massive economic exploitation of, if they needed grain, they went to countries and took over the country, took the grain, shipped it back. If they needed grapes, if they needed olives, they just went and got it. Yeah. And so they exploited all the nations. And one of the visions of Revelation 17 and 18 is all the cargo that's coming to Rome. Now, I think that's pretty cool, but we got to be careful how we describe this. All that cargo then goes back to the New Jerusalem as it's offered to God. And to me, the last one is arrogance. There is an arrogance, that nobody can do anything to us. And I have lived long enough in the United States to know at times this is the way we have taught about ourselves. Yeah. I've read enough American history to think there's a lot of Americans in time who have believed we are the greatest country in the world. We aren't the greatest country in the world if you're from Italy, or if you're from Israel. I mean, they think they're pretty cool too. And it's just arrogance to think there is such a thing. Yeah. So the overall word for empire is domination. They want to control, and they do it with force, coercion, and if you don't cooperate, they eradicate you.
Yeah. Is there a case to be made, because you guys have referenced 17 and 18 a few times, to read this book backwards? Like, is there a way to understand it?
Look at the smile right there.
Well, I have a book right here.
I know.
Reading Romans backwards, and I think that's a pretty cool book myself. But
we have
I thought at times of calling it this, but I just thought I don't want to get into that. John Walton did this with the Lost World of. Yeah. And after a while, you thought, you need to lose that idea and just write the book. And he did very well for most of those books. I mean, they've been very helpful. Yeah. But yes, I do think if you start in Revelation 17 and 18, you have a good start on how to read from the beginning forward in a healthier way than has typically been practiced.
Yeah. I think this could be said of, most books, but it's pretty prominent in Revelation literature for commentators to say there's no such thing as a reader of Revelation, there's only a rereader of Revelation. Mm-hmm. And in this sense, I think that proves to be demonstrably true, actually, that to get to 17 and 18 and see where the direction of the narrative has been going, and then to reread and to see that, oh, right, the sins that we find in these 7 churches are the things that Jesus is speaking to and rebuking and correcting. Babylon has found its way into those 7 churches, just as it's found its way into our own. And you can't see that until you get through the story at least once.
And that's the question, right?
Promises.
It's designed to provoke. Where am I and where are we participating in the Babylon of our time? What are where do we see the dynamics of Babylon at play in our church and in our world? And we're invited to that sort of dissident discipleship that you describe, instead of having merely an intellectual exercise in speculating and guessing and profiting from speculating and guessing. I'm sorry.
When you ask the question, where are we participating in Babylon? You have nailed the book of Revelation. That's what it's doing. Yeah. That's the question that people need to ask right there. If they're asking that question, they're in good shape.
That'll fit on a bracelet too, or a keychain. Come on, Zondervan.
Rock and leather.
I'm sorry I dipped out. A tree fell over on our street. It's blocking the whole street. So our power went out just for a second. We're in Tennessee and we're getting some major storms today. So yay us. It's probably God's judgment. Anyway, one of the very interesting. I'd not heard this. I've done a bunch of reading, and I'd not heard the divine judgments spoken of as disciplines or divine discipline. And so I wondered if you could. I want to save obviously a lot for people when they read the book, but I thought that was such an interesting framing of what we typically see to be the arbitrary wrath of God against, the rebels that he made this way, and however we kind of countenance that. You guys had a much different take on it. I'd love to explore that a little bit if you would.
Want me to?
Yeah, please.
Okay. One of the most interesting features of the book of Revelation that I find is let's just say, the silly chutzpah of these little churches in Western Asia Minor that nobody cares about, that Rome doesn't even know exist, probably, in some ways. And there can't be, it depends when you date the book, but there probably aren't any more than 2,000 total Christians in Western Asia Minor at this time, and that's counting the babies. And they think that their group is going to rule the world. And they have these visions that John records, says 4, 5, 6 times, that someday every nation, every tribe, every language, every people will fall down before the Lamb, before this God, and will worship this God. And the numbers that are used are beyond counting. They're myriads and myriads of people. So you have to ask the question, when is this going to happen, and how is this going to happen? And that vision, I think, is connected to the judgments that we look at as sort of graphic, vindictive, punitive judgment by God on people, where he's pouring out his wrath and he's so pissed off that he's just blowing the places up. Well, I think that totally misses what Revelation is doing. The judgments of God in the pages of the Bible are almost always designed, and I would say always designed, to warn people, to discipline people, and to call them back to faithfulness or to get them to repent from their sin. So I see the judgments as a theme that is connected to the conversion of the nations and the conversion of the world to worship the Lamb. Somehow you got to get those millions of people. And so that's where that idea comes from.
Cody, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say I think I'll go the foil to that and just say I think the distinction to the seals, trumpets, and bowls in the book are these interludes, which, trying to teach my students in Revelation that these interludes actually may be the most important feature of the book.
Yeah.
It feels really counterintuitive, but you get swept up into, seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, and then you get 6 and 7's coming, and then all of a sudden you see the Lamb.
There's a break, yes.
And you're disoriented and you're thrown off, and you think, well, this is it, the end is coming, and then you get hope and this beauty, these visions. And so these interludes have this beautiful rhetorical effect too, is what I would add, that while we're entering into the disorientation, the spiral of the book, it wants to pull us out and to show us, as we say in the book, that one day, this judgment, these disciplines will fully be poured out on Babylon, and justice will come, because God's got to clear the rubble and remove the injustice for justice to finally come fully. But as we wait, we get these visions of hope, and those visions of hope for me have become the most significant and important feature of the book.
Yeah.
And along with that and I assume you're including a little bit here, are the songs of worship in that. I mean, one of the ways the believers of Western Asia Minor coped or indwelled this empire was to worship God, the Lamb on the throne, as an act of resistance and dissidence that allowed them to have a vision of what God was actually doing in this empire that would last far beyond what's going on with Rome. So I totally agree with Cody that these interludes are so important for the readers to catch what is actually happening. And I do agree. And if Cody had grown up with me watching such things as the Left Behind movie or the Thief in the what was it called?
Thief
in the Night.
Yes.
Oh man, those were scary things. And William Burbank and Hal Lindsey, when you're a teenager and you're thinking, oh, this world is coming to an end immediately, you get caught up in what's going to happen. And I remember learning, it was just frightening and at the same time so cool to think there'd be people driving on the highways and they'd be raptured and these cars would be careening into one another and all these accidents. And
there was those bumper stickers that said caution, driver may disappear at any moment.
Yeah, I remember those.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Oh, Cody.
Well, just watch The Avengers. It happens.
Everyone turns to dust and disappears.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Go to Texas, you'll see all kinds of these. But the that sort of stuff just gives you graphic images of what would really happen, and I think it fails entirely. The first century Christians, they didn't think like that.
Yeah.
They were trying to figure out how can I be faithful when everybody that I know is gonna sacrifice to these false gods today.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah. That's so good.
So,
do you think the original audience would have understood the imagery?
It's always a very interesting question because my professor, James D.G. Dunn.
Oh, yes.
Often asked these questions, and he called it the context of meaning. And I remember having conversations with Jimmy, and I would say, Jimmy, I don't know that we should care what the audiences would catch, but I do know that we should care what the author was trying to convey. And some of the audiences would pick it up, and some of them wouldn't. But he would say to me, well, I'm really not concerned about whether graphic people in an audience are going to catch it. It's context of meaning is author and audience and context combined, so that it's something that could be understood. And I'm sure there were people, just think about a recent pagan who converts to following Jesus, and you start reading some of this stuff, and they'll say, "Who's Ezekiel? Who's Isaiah?" I mean, they wouldn't even know who Moses is.
Right.
And you had to explain that it was Jewish God and all that. This was, so some of them clearly would not have understood it, and some of them would have.
I think it also comes back to the conversation about performance, which is ancients loved. I mean, this is what they did. They loved to hear people. They would gather to hear people give improvised speeches. Right. And that was one of the ways, the sophists would do this all the time. And so I think that when you think about performance, which is, becoming, an increasingly, common sort of line of scholarship and conversation, I think that you would have to assume, I think we say this at one point in the book, you probably have to pause for questions. And I bet there's probably a lot of questions. And so you think about performance, and there's something about a performance. And here's what I'd say too, because I preach a lot of sermons, and I wouldn't say that even in preaching a sermon, everyone catches everything that I say. It's the same with lecturing. But they're catching the most significant parts. And some of it is just so visceral. And that's what I'd say about Revelation, is that it's felt in your bones almost. And when you hear it performed, you could still walk away thinking, wow, the lamb wins and the dragon loses.
Right.
I want to be on Team Lamb.
Yeah.
And you can feel that whether you get all of it or not. And I think over time you would get all of it.
Yeah.
But I think the visceral experience is maybe more important than the cognitive one.
One question we get quite a bit when we're going through, so we did a whole series just kind of going through the Bible and genre and whatnot. And one of the questions we got then that we've had a couple times since then as well is, why does it seem like I need to have, I don't remember how they worded it, why do I need a
theology
freaking PhD to
why do I need a
to
degree
be able
in theology to
even
understand
approach the Bible? And so like when you just brought the example of like the recently converted pagan that sees these and goes, what, who, what, how do you guys encourage people to, the people who are not in seminary, who have never been to seminary, the people who don't have the time to read as much as you guys have read, how do they approach this book faithfully when it has just been so, as we've established, unfaithfully regurgitated for eons? How do you guys encourage? Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let Scott take the technical part about Revelation, but I'll just say, as someone who didn't grow up in the church, who again works with and pastors a lot of young adults who, whether we like the term or not, are deconstructing their faith. Right. I think one of the great lies that they've been told, and I say this all the time, and I'm trying to get youth pastors and youth workers here in Canada to stop saying this. They say the Bible's easy to understand. You got to sit down on your own and read it by yourself. And the God will download to you exactly what it means for you right now.
Yeah.
And I like that word download. I don't even know what that means. But
it's like the Matrix.
Yeah. So it is like the Matrix. So part of what I'd say there is that I'm just trying to say it's complicated, it's meditative literature, but it's meant to be read in community. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think this whole notion of a personal Bible time, while it's great and I do it, I think that it actually sometimes hurts people more than it helps. So I'm trying to have people think more about like wrestling with God when it comes to the Bible and refusing to let go. And that's become a more powerful image for me. But Scott, you can speak to Revelation particularly.
Yeah, well, I used to speak quite a bit at a church with the initials Willow Creek. And, after I spoke, I would get asked questions at times where I didn't say this, but I thought this, and I would say to myself, someone should take your Bible from you. You need to start over because you're just getting things so mixed up. Now, I would never do that, but I would certainly think that. But I do think that Cody has tapped on something that's very important. Is the average person thinking that they can read any book in the Bible and make sense of it is really pretty silly. The church has always taught, it's called the perspicacity or perspicuity of Scripture, that the average person who reads the Bible can understand the basic message. It doesn't say it's going to understand every detail. The best scholars in the world don't know what to make at times of Romans 9 through 11. Mm-hmm. And the book of Revelation requires a sensitivity to a genre called apocalyptic, a sensitivity to Old Testament imagery, how prophecy works, what empire means, what Rome is about. So these images are flying in this book.
Yeah.
And to think that they just intuitively make sense is dangerous. We do this in all sorts of things. Now, I do think that most of us can read the Chronicles of Narnia and get the storyline, all right? Mm-hmm. But the Chronicles of Narnia is not a first century text. If I give my students a biography or a novel, an ancient Greek novel from the first century, frequently they'll get lost because they won't know what some image and what's being played. So I often quote this. I've been quoting this for more than 40 years. There's a German line by Johann von Goethe that goes like this. Willst ein Dichter du verstehen, musst in Dichters Land gehen. And it means, translated, if you want to understand a poet, you have to go to the poet's land. And the point there is, if you want to understand a first century Jewish Christian apocalyptic text, you're going to have to go read some first century apocalyptic texts to catch how these things work. And it's only fair to another person to listen to them in their world. Yeah. And until you do that, you're not really a good listener.
Yeah.
So, there.
Yeah. There. Great question, Tim. Listen, gentlemen, I'm really proud of you guys. This is a great book, and it's a great addition and super accessible to loads of great scholarship. So well done. Well done. I'm so glad it came out when we're in the middle of a whole series of conversations about the book itself. So not only is it helpful for our folks, it's helpful to me, but I really would encourage our audience to go check it out. Scott, I know you have a Substack, and I don't know how exactly those work. I used to read your blog all the time, and now it's a Substack. Is it still a blog, or what is a Substack exactly?
What is a blog? What is a Substack? Substack is they called it a newsletter for a while, but it's less and less a newsletter. It's more and more communication of people who want to read stuff that I'm writing. So it's Substack is I don't know what you'd call I don't know what they call those things, but it's if you look up Substack and then type in my name, it'll send you to my site.
Great. Cody, we need some what are you, millennial, Gen Z?
I'm millennial.
We need a millennial interpretation of Substack, because I grew up with blogs, and then they turned into newsletters, and which just sounds like another word for blog. I'm not quite sure exactly, but tell me, Cody,
I think
just
Substack
as we wrap
is
up.
similar. I think it might be another type of word for blog. I think the difference is you can sign up and it'll get sent right to your email box. And then there's also a paywall for some of the posts. Yeah. So you pay to be a subscriber, which becomes a good way for people who are writing to make supplementary income. Because there's a lot of money in writing. So the writers out there can use our support. I think it's a hybrid of many different platforms, but it's still basically, I would think you would write the same sort of stuff you use to write on your blog. Right, Scott?
Yeah, it's totally the same stuff for me. Same thing.
Well, Scott, people, a lot of our listeners are not going to know the heyday of the Scott McKnight blog. The Rob Bell days, the Mark Driscoll days. It was glorious. There was another. We can cut all of this, but I was literally just trying to figure out, because I wanted Scott to direct people to that Substack, and then I got caught up in what is that exactly, and I don't know. But anyway, all right, we'll just direct people to your Substack.
Are you suggesting those were the heydays, and I'm on the decline now? Is that what you're suggesting?
Oh no, just the art form is on the decline.
You're ramping up.
Oh yeah,
That's right.